So welcome. We're going to talk about looking ahead to upper elementary. I am Margaret Jarrell, the elementary director. I taught lower elementary at Green Spring for many years and then had a short stint as a director of admissions before moving to Florida, where I am now with my family, and I work remotely in a support role. I was a Montessori child myself, at least through kindergarten. Montessori teacher and now Montessori mom. So I feel like I've come full circle. And my daughter is in her third year of Children's House here in Florida. So Brad, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. My name is Brad Choate. I am the upper elementary guide here at Green Spring Montessori. I am both the in-person guide and the virtual guide because the upper elementary program is the only program we have here at the school that is a hybrid model. So I spend half of my time here in the classroom with children in real life, and then I spend half of the time with children who are online, at least as long as this year goes on. I too am a Montessori dad, although I was not a Montessori child. Both of my children are here at Green Spring. My daughter Priya is in the toddler classroom. My son Garrick is in a Children's House classroom. And let's see, outside of this whole thing of Montessori, I teach Tai Chi.
And I will say our presentation is more geared towards non-COVID regular life times, but Brad can also chime in and talk about how he's made modifications, to accommodate our current situation, which hopefully will not be the case again. We're so hopeful, but he can certainly point out some of those pieces as we go.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I'm going to share my screen, so just give me a moment.
Yeah.
All right. So here we are, looking forward to upper elementary, and we're excited to take you on a little virtual tour. We started with this quotation just because it embodies sort of the spirit of the elementary years. Dr. Montessori said, knowledge can be best given where there's eagerness to learn. So this is the period, and she meant the elementary years, when the seed of everything can be sown, the child's mind being like a fertile field, ready to receive what will germinate into culture. I love this because whereas the Children's House age child has the absorbent mind and is soaking everything in, the elementary years are such an age of curiosity and wonder and wanting to know how the world works that we feel like we're planting these seeds and then sending them off to explore and find their way. Brad, do you want to talk a little bit about the 4 planes of development?
I'd love to. So the 4 planes of development are a developmental theory that Dr. Montessori borrowed from Piaget. It covers the period from birth all the way till the brain stops growing at the age of 24. And it's broken into 4 different periods, each of which are 6 years long. So infancy we've already been through. That covers the toddler rooms and Children's House. Childhood is from 6 to 12. Adolescence from 12 to 18. And then maturity from 18 to 24. So in infancy, they do have the absorbent mind. In what's called childhood here, which is the elementary age, we have the emergence of the imagination and also the emergence of the reasoning mind. Mm-hmm. Oh, did I go too far?
No, that's fine. I just thought I'd go to the matching slide to what you're talking about.
Thank you.
Describing that second plane.
Yeah, it gives them the ability to think abstractly, and it gives them a hunger that to learn everything about the world. Sometimes it's a general, I want to learn everything, and for other students, it's specifically, I want to know everything about ants. Or some specific subject area there. They do develop an imagination, and I see this more as it's a development of control of the imagination so that they themselves can purposefully imagine a scenario. and think out how it would go within the confines of their own mind. Because of the emergence of imagination, a lot of what happens between 6 and 12 in both lower and upper elementary is storytelling, because it really activates that imaginative portion of the brain and helps bring them to that place, wherever it may be. As I'm sure you're aware, having elementary schoolers at home, you hear a lot about fairness and a lack of fairness. That is completely developmentally appropriate in the second plane of development. Figuring out what is right and what is wrong and how they fit into the administration of justice is completely a part of development. And of course, they are figuring out who they are socially as well.
Great. So, go ahead, Brad.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say, this is a tiny bit of review, but we're talking about some of the through pieces that will look familiar from lower elementary to upper elementary. We continue to have this uninterrupted work cycle in which individuals and small group lessons are happening with the guide, while others are working independently and in small groups moving about the classroom with those opportunities to choose work or where they sit or with whom they work, and a freedom to move about the room. Of course, this is freedom with responsibility, which you're familiar with. So as much structure as is needed, for the student to be successful with that. But this is carried through into the upper elementary from what you're used to seeing in the lower L.
Right now, because of COVID restrictions, we still do have a 3-hour work cycle, but it's broken up a bit differently than it would be otherwise. Normally, I would pick students and give them lessons throughout the entire 3-hour cycle. Because I'm working with the in-class students and then the online students, I give all of my lessons in a portion of the 3-hour work cycle. And then the other half of it, they have to work independently on any piece of work that they wish to, with some guidance when it comes to choosing work, which is something we work on throughout the year as a part of executive function. And then the online children will have their open work time first and then lessons second. So that's a little bit different this year. Mm-hmm. Also, freedom of movement. The children this year, they have a spot where they sit and work, and that's to make sure that we are socially distanced from one another. They can still get up from that spot and get water and do all the independent stuff like use the restroom or get a drink or get a snack, whatever it may be. But it's a bit more restricted this year just to make sure we're all staying safe.
So Brad, this is another overarching theme that carries through from lower elementary to upper elementary. Would you like to talk about cosmic education and the great lessons?
Oh yes, I would. Cosmic education is the name for the elementary curriculum. The reason it's called cosmic education is because there is no division between one subject and another. Everything is interdisciplinary, and it's all based on the great lessons as a foundation. So the idea behind cosmic education is that children who are learning will see those connections and then connect themselves with the entirety of the universe, answering the questions, who am I and why am I here? And it addresses that search for knowledge and the desire to find one's place within the world. So the way we set the stage for this type of education, for cosmic education, is through the great stories. There are 5 great stories, and they prepare the child to understand all courses of human knowledge from a shared perspective. So first, we talk about my lesson is called The Song of the Universe, and it is about the creation of the universe. How in the beginning there was light and heat, and from that were born all the things that we have today, whether they be stars or planets or even ourselves. linking ourselves back to the creation of the universe is important because it lets the children imagine and be invested in the story. After we've established how Earth came to be in that story, the next story is the coming of life, where we talk about life as a balancing factor between the elements on our planet. We also talk about the evolution of life from the very first single-celled organisms all the way up to human beings. After we get to that point, we've set the stage for the coming of human beings, where we talk about the things that make humans different from other animals. We talk about, of course, our hands and our minds, but also we talk about how our heart is special, not because it pumps blood, but because we humans have a special love, and that love can appreciate the suffering of people we've never met before and want them to have a better life. The next two lessons are more historical. We talk about the story of writing from the very first writers who were painting pictograms up through the evolution of alphabets into our own language today. And we talk about the story of numbers as a separate alphabet, a separate language that we use specifically for talking about how much, how many, and how long. And that prepares the students to understand all the subjects.
Yeah, that's something I love about these lessons. They are repeated every year throughout lower and upper elementary, very intentionally. And they become sort of a rite of passage, and as children age up, they glean more and different things out of each presentation. But then this framework is built, and every other lesson that they're going to be given throughout their elementary career somehow fits back into this big picture and has a greater context and a meaning. And even though Brad said we don't break down the curriculum areas, which we don't because they're all intertwined, we just wanted to give a sense of the richness and the depth of what we're able to go into using these great lessons as a springboard. So in science, from the first couple of great lessons, we are able to move into astronomy and talking about the birth of stars and how solar systems and galaxies are created. It leads us into meteorology, wind and currents and weather and the water cycle, chemistry, physics, geology. I mean, each of these is such a rich part of our curriculum that I'm tempted to let you talk about it instead of me, Brad, in case you can give a few examples or of lessons or anything you'd like to share in these areas.
So just that, in addition to calling back to the great lessons, we also call out to our wider environment. Now, I know we'll talk about going outs later, which are very important, and we're not doing this year because it would not be safe. But with things like meteorology and botany especially, but also geology and biology, we'll go out into the wider environment of our school and we'll collect samples and do observations. So it's not just calling back to that abstract. We have a very tangible connection to the science curriculum in particular. And we love experiments in upper elementary. We do lots of experiments in upper elementary.
All right, why don't you walk us through a little bit about geography and history? I know this is a particular love of yours, Brad.
It is. So Dr. Montessori and her son Mario, while they were designing the curriculum, they were thinking of what the name for the guide should be, because guide is mostly a lower elementary term, although guide is mostly a primary term, but I've embraced it. And their term they came up with is a bit of a mouthful. It's storyteller of the truth. So I take that role very, very seriously, even though I don't say it very often because it is a mouthful. So for history, the way children connect with history is by imagination. And so I have a suite of stories, relatively short, but evocative to the children, to not only engage them in historical events that happened, but give them a sense of who the people were and how they can relate to the individuals who have been present through history. having historic role models is very important to children of the elementary level. And so the very first project we do in our upper elementary program is called The Ghost from the Past, where our children will pick famous people from history and research them, and then dress as them and give a speech as their ghost on Halloween. It's fun for everyone.
There's a picture of that at the end, Brad, and this year it was virtual, right? So we have a screen capture of all the little squares of all your different ghosts. So we'll show you that at the end of the show.
I love it. For geography, we focus on relating geography to the modern day. So we do current events regularly, and we'll talk and look at the world and talk about where these countries are in relation to each other. Where is Armenia? Where is Azerbaijan? Where is India? Where is Bangladesh? Depending on what issue we're talking about. I think the very first one we did was talking about the plight of the Uyghurs in China. So we looked at China, and then we broke China down into the different states. And we talked about the differences between Xinjiang and, just in geography, the difference between Xinjiang and Xinjiang, sorry. And, I'm completely blanking on that place in southern China. Give me a second.
Take your time.
Hunan, there we go. And we looked at some pictures of Hunan and pictures of Xinjiang, and you can't tell it's the same country. It looks completely geographically different. They're completely different biomes. And so from there, we approach how is culture different in these places. And that's all related back to the social studies aspect of this, which is the current events. We still do have not puzzle maps. We still do have maps that we use and fill out as we learn about the entirety of the world. And then the study into individual cultures is encouraged.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Beautiful. Oh, language. Dr. Montessori's language materials are so beautiful. I'm just going to let you talk here, Brad. This is your baby.
Sure. So we in upper elementary, we have a book club, and in book club, the children made a choice as to what book they want to read, and then they chose Treasure Island. So every week they're reading Treasure Island, and in small groups they have jobs. So we have one person who is the summarizer, who comes back to the group with a summary of the chapter they read. We have one person who is what does the luminator do? I forgot.
Oh, the luminary picks like a favorite passage or something from the chapter that they'd like to highlight and explain, what spoke to them about that.
And we have an illustrator who will illustrate an important scene or set piece from the book. And then we have the person who links
Connector.
The connector. Thank you. We have the connector who connects something that they relate to every day to something that they read in the book. In addition to that, we do reading of short stories with analysis afterwards. We also do reading of current events articles, and then afterwards we ask the children to think of questions they have and identify vocab that they have from the current events article. I forgot. There's a word wizard, which is my personal favorite, for the book club. And the word wizard will find words that they don't recognize at first, and they'll look them up in the dictionary, writing the definition and the part of speech down so they can really own that word from then on. We have a lot of writing that goes on in upper elementary, both academic writing, nonfiction, and fiction writing. For nonfiction, we really focus on developing paragraph formation first, and then from there developing essay formation, being able to put multiple paragraphs together and link them through their intro and conclusion sentences so that it forms a real complete essay. We also work on different types of essays as a part of upper elementary, and we work on the editing process. When it comes to fiction writing, we focus on how to make compelling stories. So we talk about the agency of the protagonists. We speak about the roles that are played in books, whether they're protagonists, antagonists, or support. We talk about what makes an interesting group dynamic. There's a lot of fiction that gets done in upper elementary, and so there's a whole world that needs to be built. We also talk about the overall structure of fictional work in terms of the 3-act structure and the story mountain. And of course, I love the hero's journey. So we also have lessons on the hero's journey and how to make an arc for an individual character and make that arc interesting. For grammar, we have all the materials that we had in lower L, except we don't do grammar boxes. We do have that material to help recognize the parts of speech, but mostly what we focus on when it comes to grammar here is either functional in the form of editing or sentence analysis. That way we can really focus on what makes a sentence meaningful rather than looking at individual words. We do still do a great deal of word study, especially when it comes to the roots of words and understanding how the root and the suffix interact with the meaning of the word as a whole. I love etymology, and so I bring that to our classroom. I already talked. I did all the things.
Yeah, you did it. Thank you. All right. Just a little topic here, mathematics. And
so in math, we get a variety of abilities, but I should have put this in here. We have some people working on whole number operations, especially those children who come to us from lower L. And what they're working on is the passage to abstraction, which I know we have another slide for, and I'll talk about that then. But I have more to say about math in general now. We do have children working on fractions, decimals, multiples, squaring and cubing, percentages, ratios, probability estimating. We have children working on full-blown algebra, like from Algebra 1, because that's where they are mathematically, and this is a part of meeting children where they are and bringing them to meet their potential. This is an area where we can really see some differentiation between students, and given what we have in this classroom, honestly, we can take them up just about to before calculus in terms of what we can teach, because algebra, once they get to that level, it's all an abstraction. So there's a very far distance one can go when it comes to mathematics. I'm limited because I don't remember calculus, so that's why we can't do that here. We do still, of course, start with the materials, and a part of the process of being an upper L is using those materials. Now I'm ready for that next one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, I'll come back to that other one because I think this is what you talk about.
Yeah, is using those materials and transferring that knowledge of how to use the material into being able to do math on paper. A lot of students moving up to upper elementary are really looking forward to just abandoning their materials and doing all the math on paper. And we don't do it that way. There's a process. First, we use the material for everything. Then we use the material and we write down the problem and the answer. Then we use the material, we write down the process, the problem and the answer. Then we write down the process, we check on the material, and we write down the answer. And then finally, we can use just the process. This is true of multiplication. This is true of long division. This is true of every type of operation that we do. Right now, the most popular operation in our classroom is square root. We have a few children who can do square root in complete abstraction. I can just give them a number and they can figure out the square root no matter how big that number is. I had a child ask me for a number in the tens of millions. That was her request. She said, could you please give me a number in the tens of millions for me to do a square root? And I said, I'd love to. And I really did. And so to get there, we do have a material called the pegboarded. I love this material. We also, in addition to the other things we talked about, we also do cube root. And I think it referred to it as story problems, but word problems are a big part of what we do in upper elementary too, to help understand why it's important.
And what I love about this age, I mean, it begins in lower elementary, these moments where this abstract understanding comes, and it's almost like a light bulb flicking. I mean, all this foundation that's been built and all this hands-on work, and then all of a sudden, it just makes sense, which is to the child, and they don't need materials anymore, which is so different from the way that so many of us learned, especially in math, where we were taught the tricks and you cross this out and you drop this down, and you don't really know why it works, but it works. You just memorize it. And here we're coming about it from the opposite direction. The putting on paper is actually recording what they have learned and truly understand about what they're doing in math. And it becomes so exciting that way, that you see a student like this one on the right who wanted to do the biggest division problem, in the history of the world, and created that problem and had to tape the pieces of paper together to make it all fit. And, I'm sure you wouldn't have assigned that problem, Brad. That just came from
Nope.
his excitement and desire to do something big and grand.
Yeah, and I wanted to say two things. One is the importance of the material, as Dr. Montessori put it, was that it creates a touchstone in the mind, so that the child doesn't just memorize the process, which can easily be forgotten, but they can go back and they can remember the material in the mind's eye and do the problem on the material in their head. And that's why it makes sense.
Mhm.
That's just incredible. I wish I were a Montessori child and I had learned math that way. But it's part of why I love the Montessori math materials so much. I can really see how it works that way with the children. And also, after that child did that math problem, it started a trend, and we had several groups of people, some of whom don't normally enjoy math all that much, doing huge long division problems because they had seen and were inspired by this big work.
Beautiful. All right, I'll go back to the one we skipped, where I was just hoping you could briefly touch on all these other pieces that, while we also address them through enrichment, they are also interwoven just throughout the daily fabric of the classroom.
Yeah, especially when it comes to project work, art is a natural part of the learning process. So when children are making a presentation and they're making a poster, for example, that art is a part of their work. It doesn't have to have a separate room or a separate time. It's a part of the overall understanding that they're gaining of their subject matter. Um, Practical life is something we implement here in the classroom uh, through our democracy. So in our classroom, we act as a democracy. The children have created a constitution for the classroom. It is completely theirs. There's not one word of mine on there, and they have talked about, one, what they want to feel like when they're in school. Two, how they can feel that way and make others feel that way. And three, how they, or what they will do when they encounter conflict to be able to get through the conflict and back to the way they want to feel. And that can be revised at any point. The children also went through the process of developing a technology policy, because this year we have a lot more technology in the classroom, and we didn't really have need for one last year because there was such a limit on how much computer access we had, but there was a big need this year. So we all got together, and again, through a democratic process of revision and consensus. Ultimately, there was consensus about how we want to use our computers and what they are really for. And they decided they're really for education, and they don't need to use the computers for things that are not about education, which I was delighted to hear.
Right, good answer. So similar to lower elementary, in our upper elementary program, we still have that beautiful luxury of being able to guide students and allow them to learn at their own pace. So instead of being limited by a predetermined schedule or curriculum where we have to move on whether students are ready or not, or we have to slog through something even if they already understand it. The lessons are presented to individuals in small groups as they are ready for them. And that means that the guide does a lot of observation and working one-on-one with students to truly understand where they are in their understanding and plan individually and record their progress individually. I love this picture because this is one of Brad's online students who needed a little extra reinforcement with a concept. And so he was able to pull her into a breakout room, and ingeniously using something called virtualmontessori.com, she had a stamp game, he had a stamp game, he had his iPhone on a gooseneck to look at his desk, and they were able to do this together, and he could guide her through this process even not in the same room. It was really amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was fun. I got to observe that lesson. It was magical. Brad, will you tell us a little bit about the 3-period lesson?
Sure. So the 3-period lesson is a way of introducing an idea to a child. And then, so the first period is the actual introduction. And I use this a lot in science. I also use it a lot in geometry. So if I were introducing types of triangles by their sides, I would have an example of an isosceles triangle. I would have an example of an equilateral triangle and an example of a scalene triangle. I would show each triangle and ask into what the children thought was different. This is an introduction. Then the second period is asking the child, could you hand me the isosceles triangle? Thank you. This is an isosceles triangle. Could you put a scalene triangle on your head? It's cute, but it helps them because I'm using the words and they're learning the concept while I'm using the words. This is the second period. The third period is saying, what triangle is this? And then they use the words. The third period is a demonstration of knowledge, or I typically say demonstration of mastery. This process is not just for individual lessons, but it's an overall understanding that in order for a child to have knowledge, they need to be introduced to it, they need to practice it, and then they need to be able to demonstrate it. And that's something that I try to bring to every different subject. But the actual lesson style is something that comes up a lot in science and, again, in geometry.
One thing I love about this is that it really is something that sets Montessori apart, because in so many traditional educational environments, the emphasis is on that first period and the teacher imparting the knowledge, the lecture, the lesson is the bulk of what you get. There's a limited amount of sort of experimentation and investigation, and of course a great emphasis on demonstration of mastery, especially with standardized testing and all these things that are required in other settings. In Montessori, that introduction, the guide gives just enough information to spark the curiosity and interest of the student, and then they are left to truly explore, practice, work, teach others, collaborate, really dig in deep and gain a true understanding of something. And then there's even a freedom given often in how they choose to demonstrate their mastery, whether it's giving a presentation or writing a play or, a song or a story or, all these different, building a diorama or a model, however they choose, which also, brings the learning to life. And so in a Montessori classroom, that second period really gets a lot of time and justice.
Yeah. And a lot of times when a lesson is over, when that first period is done, I have some ideas for what follow-up could be, but I'll always ask, or I'm in a practice of asking, how is it that you would like to follow up with this lesson? And sometimes they come up with exactly what I was thinking, and other times they come up with stuff that's amazing and I never would have thought of in a million years. But that's a place where freedom can really be shown when they get to choose how they want to investigate whatever lesson was just given, because of course the lessons are there not to give all the information, but just to inspire the children to be able to get the information for themselves.
So as this is born in lower elementary, the child becoming much more social and starting to really crave collaboration with others. So this continues, through upper elementary with so many benefits to all these collaborative experiences. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like at your level, Brad?
Yeah, I'd say in its most basic form, children often want to work with other children to remember fully whatever concept or exercise they're doing. So, I have some children who were recently introduced to the pegboard doing square root work, and they'll pull from different groups around the classroom. Do you remember how to do this part? Do you remember how to do this part? And they'll come together, and inevitably, we start to see a few things. We see someone taking charge of how the process is going to go. That's the development of leadership. We see people volunteering to take on different roles. That's teamwork. There's always communication. Um, the time management part comes in when they're doing a project that they are going to present. Many times children will do research and then they'll have a goal of presenting. And a part of being in upper elementary is having a meeting with me. We'll talk about the three legs of responsibility, or the three tools of responsibility. But in the meeting, we'll talk about when they want to present, and then they will make their own deadlines, and we'll hold them to those deadlines and make sure they understand they have a certain amount of time to complete their work. Now, it's up to them how much time they give themselves, but it's an excellent lesson to understand how much time they have. And this is where we also see conversations around shared responsibility and conflict resolution. Last year, when we were working on passion projects, we had two children working with each other. They're very good friends, but one of them felt like the other was not bringing their full attention to their shared project. And so I take care to develop a high degree of trust with all the children. They both came to me. They said, this isn't working. And so we had a chance to sit down and talk about what isn't working. How could we make it work? And they were really engaged in that process.
Oops, sorry. Going out, sadly, this is a practice that we're not able to engage in this year during this time of COVID, but it's such an exciting part of what we're able to do at the elementary level. Laura her older son may have been able to have this experience in previous years, but can you talk a little bit, Brad, about going out experiences that your students have engaged in?
Sure. So we've done a great variety of going outs since I've been here. Some of the most popular ones are service going outs. So students will have a cause and have a drive, whether it's a can drive or a drive for things for animals they can donate to the ASPCA. Whatever it may be, they'll take collections and then bring them to a place to donate them. And it really helps them feel connected to the community and like they're making a difference in the wider world, which they are. In that process, they, of course, have to learn how to make a presentable flyer. They need to learn, how do I speak to an adult on the phone? How do I make an appointment? These are all essentially grace and courtesy for the upper elementary child, and so important as something to think about as they develop their practical life skills. We've also had academic ones. I think one of the ones that went the best was a student was really interested in one of the great stories, The Coming of Human Beings, and she wanted to learn about how early humans lived. And so she did a lot of research, and she came up with an idea of how early humans lived. And then the going out to supplement her research was going to the Museum of Natural History. And she had an incredible experience at the Museum of Natural History, going through the early humans exhibit. and she took lots of pictures, and she came back and she made a fantastic presentation to the whole class about her experience there and everything she learned and how it related back to her research before.
Love that. So we touched on this a little bit earlier, and just among all these pieces that are interwoven, grace and courtesy, which we start with our youngest toddlers, and it takes the form of learning how to interrupt politely or say good morning or tuck in a chair. This just becomes that much more sophisticated, as our students grow older, and many of these skills, as Brad touched on, become then put into real life situations as students go out and are in these real life situations. I love this picture because it was a group of students who were they at the zoo, or were they in the Australia biome of the aquarium? I can't remember.
I believe they were in the Australia biome of the aquarium.
All right. Well, they had arranged with a docent, to have a special behind the scenes tour, and had prepared questions for her. And what an amazing experience of both practical life and grace and courtesy to prepare for this interview with an expert in the field. Oh, talk about peace education, Brad. You already mentioned the classroom constitution that your students create in the beginning of the year, but this is fascinating. And of course, I didn't specifically add MMUN, but I had to put this amazing picture in here. So tell us a little bit about this.
Sure. So every week we have a classroom meeting, and the classroom meeting, we give it about an hour's worth of time. During that time, we'll go over any suggestions the children have, which are adopted or not adopted based on votes. Children always have the ability to vote for, against, or abstain from any vote. That is actually an indirect preparation. No, that's direct preparation for potentially doing MMUN, Montessori Model United Nations, because that's how they vote in MMUN. In our community meetings, after we do suggestions and we read our Constitution, we will have a grace and courtesy lesson. In upper elementary, the lessons are a bit more complex. I think the last one we did was developing our technology policy, but just before that, we did how to accept an apology. And the week before that was how to make an excellent apology. So you can see we're working on higher level grace and courtesy than we were working on in, say, lower L or the primary classrooms. And the children, I have to say, the children at the upper elementary level are so excited to do service work that it's not even a push from us to get them to do it. They naturally want to do it. They want to help, especially if they have a specific cause. Humans, dogs, or horses, typically.
Well, and even though art and music and Spanish and all these other pieces are built in naturally into this interwoven curriculum, we do offer some additional enrichment with experts in their field. So at the elementary level, our students will continue to have art enrichment. Miss Laura is our art guide this year. Music with Miss Jasmine, Spanish with Miss Marcella, physical education with Coach Liz. Library, we haven't been able to do in the same way, this year because of COVID restrictions. But I'd imagine, in a typical year, students are using that as a resource on a daily basis. And we're also not able to offer after-school sports or other activities this year. But in a typical year, we'd have a rich variety. Am I wrong about that, Brad?
I actually managed to wedge in Dungeons and Dragons Club because we can do it completely virtually. So we do have one upper elementary enrichment after school offering, and that's Dungeons and Dragons Club.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, so the needs of the elementary student, especially the upper elementary student, continue to be meaningful engagement, which is where those great lessons, are such a pivotal foundation, because they show this meaning of where all these other lessons then fit in. They inspire the imagination. Our students they crave these opportunities to work with others, as well as time to reflect and connect and form their own ideas, as well as the ability to go beyond the classroom walls, whether it be on our very own campus, in our outdoor environment, and or on going out excursions when we're able to do so. And our students really take advantage of these opportunities to struggle and debate and create, which is all part of what Montessori described as the self-construction of the human being. So within that, students have both freedoms but responsibilities. I'm going to let you speak to this, Brad.
All right. So, Dr. Montessori talked about a mutual arising of freedom and responsibility. As children show responsibility, they gain additional freedom. But the assumption is that they should have the freedom to be able to choose their own work. And then they have the responsibility to do constructive and productive work. We help them reach this level through some guidance when it comes to planning their day. Every morning we go through a process of planning, and it's been really helpful to students, especially ones who need some help when it comes to planning. They have the freedom to work in groups. The responsibility is then that work generates discussion, debate, argument, decisions, and solutions. We have an incredible group of students working together on a play that they have torn up 3 times and put back together. And it is completely different than it was. And honestly, as a reader, much better than it was originally.
Wow.
But they're finally to the point that they are actually practicing. They're going to perform for the classroom, and they're very excited about it. So that's the kind of responsibility that comes from their freedom to work in groups. And then they have the freedom to talk. Conversation is pertinent and substantial and meaningful, and it relates to what they're working on in the classroom or what they're learning about in the classroom.
Now, would you speak to the incredibly deep and challenging and rich experience of being a guide and everything that that entails in a Montessori setting?
Sure. So it's my job to be a model of adulthood for the children. Of course, it's also my job to give them lessons and to, as a part of those lessons, inspire them and entice them into doing more work in whatever area it is, whether it's their favorite or their least favorite or a neutral area. Inspiration has to be a part of every lesson to get them to engage with the work in a meaningful way, because it has to be their decision to work with the work and not some external forcing them to work with the work. One way of doing that is asking them questions and getting them to go further into their own work. A part of how I can ask effective questions is sitting and observing, watching the students as they work, looking at the students as they are a part of a lesson, but not just checking to see that they're doing it, seeing how they are attending to their work in general, developing a plan from the observations, and recording all the progress that they've made through those lessons. And then collaborating with my team members in the elementary team, collaborating with my assistant as we switch back and forth between the classroom and the virtual classroom, and having a deep understanding not only of the lessons and how to give them, but also having a deep understanding of each child's needs when it comes to their learning. That's all.
No small feat.
Yeah.
All right. So, although the role of the guide is vast, the beauty of the Montessori method is that the student meets the guide part way, and one way in which the student stays responsible and accountability are through what we call these 3 pillars of accountability. Is this what you call the 3-legged stool, Brad?
Yeah, but I think I stole that from my college. But yeah, the 3 pillars of accountability, or the 3 tools of responsibility, that's what we call them from training. So the first is the work journal. It's something they work in every day. They plan in upper elementary. They plan their day. Although some students will primarily record, but that's at a higher level than planning. Then regular one-on-one meetings with the guide. This is something that happens. We try to do it every other week. And in those meetings, we'll talk about a student's progress. We'll talk about how they're doing their lessons. We'll also talk about how they're doing on their on any projects that they're working on. And that's where we'll develop things like deadlines for those projects. And that is, again, student-driven rather than guide-driven. And then finally, the Common Core standards in the classroom. This is so that a child knows what they're responsible to know by the time they graduate from 6th grade. We have that in the form of the book here, and we have that in the form of a book here in the classroom that the children have access to, so they can look and see what is it they know, what is it they don't know yet, and then that's a part of what informs them when it comes to our one-on-one meetings.
So we've touched on many of these different methods by which we monitor and measure students' growth, observation being so incredibly pivotal. Of course, the 3rd period of the lesson, when the student demonstrates their own mastery, is a great way to measure that. And through those one-on-one meetings, there's such an opportunity for students to learn the art of self-reflection, and actually build that skill as something they'll take with them the rest of their lives. One beauty of the multi-age classroom is that students all have various different strengths and challenges in different areas, and have opportunities to be leaders and teachers to others. And I can't think of a better way to demonstrate mastery than to teach a concept to another person. But it's also through their awareness of what the expectations are through Common Core, or what's required for various benchmark assessments, that they can take responsibility for measuring their own growth as well. And then this is communicated to parents through regular check-ins. We have 3 conferences throughout the school year, and all documented with notes, and the final meeting being documented with a formal progress report, which is very, very detailed and includes narrative passages about everything that the student has been working on, what their strengths are, where their areas for growth are, and really paints a complete picture of the student's journey through upper elementary. Oh no, blank. Oh, here we are, because we would normally observe in an upper elementary classroom as part of this event, which we're not able to do this evening, but we do have a very, very brief glimpse. This is a walk. Was this last year that this was taken, or the year before?
It's actually the year before last.
Okay. We're just going to take a quick tour, and feel free to narrate anything that you want to point out here, Brad, as we walk through your room.
All right. So you notice that Leo is transcribing. He's not typing from the top of his head. He's already done the work, and now he's using the computer. That messy table isn't there anymore. So this is a part of the planning process for how to present information in a way that makes sense. They are planning on doing a poster board as part of presentation. This is a one-on-one lesson with Bevan, who at the time was my assistant. Now, of course, he's the lower elementary guide. And he is teaching fraction work. This is a group of students. They are coordinating a going out. If I recall correctly, they were collecting donations to deliver to a homeless shelter. The children outside of the lessons are completely regulating themselves and doing their own work independently without having someone watch over them, which allowed Bevan and I to each be giving lessons. These are two children who are having trouble with the nature of fractions. And so I am teaching them about how fractions work and basic fraction operations. I remember a lot from this day.
Were these two students composing something or playing a piece of music, Brad?
I believe they were playing a piece of music, but they were figuring out how to play it on the bells versus the tone bars.
Mm.
He's working on algebra. They're having a snack. And I believe each of them independently is working on different fiction stories. You can see that freedom of movement.
Mhm.
I've got to do another one of those.
Oh yeah, those are amazing. I love them. Oh, wait, no. Well, we wanted to end today by touching on sort of the skills that a Montessori student enters the world with, and the gift, that you've given your children as parents by giving them this time to work on their self-construction. Montessori students go out into the world with so much more independence and confidence that comes from overcoming, worthy challenges. Our students are self-motivated because that innate sense of wonder and trust has been bestowed upon them from their very earliest years. They are self-advocates. I've heard stories of Montessori students going on to high school and suggesting more interesting assignments to their teachers or letting someone know when they do need more help and really feeling empowered to speak for themselves and what they need for their learning. Our students have had the opportunities to both lead and collaborate. And of course, because of the emphasis on peace education, grace and courtesy, conflict resolution, service and stewardship, our students tend to be so community minded, going out in the world with just this desire and mission to make it a better place. We could probably go add 100 more things to this list, but it's just sort of an interesting snapshot.
And I wanted to talk about this picture for a second. This is one of our students at Montessori Model United Nations in New York City getting interviewed. This student ultimately was chosen to represent her committee and speak on the floor of the General Assembly of the United Nations, the actual United Nations, not the Model United Nations. She is not the only one who has had this honor. Last year, when we went just before coronavirus became a thing, another of our students was chosen for that honor. So there's a high degree of rigor from the MMUN program, and it is academically challenging, and it's also very rewarding.
So we just wanted to touch on it as sort of by way of a review of everything we talked about. Some of the differences between traditional education versus Montessori education. You chose Montessori for your children for many reasons, and at the upper elementary level, you'll continue to see all these amazing benefits. Instead of the teacher as the expert and seen as the one to bestow knowledge upon the student. You know, in Montessori, we call our teachers guides for that very reason. They guide students through their own self-development and their own learning process. Instead of students being grouped and confined by their age or grade, these mixed age groups allow us to meet the students where they are, for them to have opportunities to lead, also to learn at their own pace, to be inspired by others, to be mentors. It's really just such a gift. Instead of learning through lecture and in didactic means, the learning continues to be hands-on, even at this level where the abstract learning is really blossoming, as Brad described. All these foundations have been laid with the hands-on manipulatives. And instead of the curriculum being predetermined and confined to a set pace, Brad has the luxury to be able to individualize that, the beautiful broad scope of the Montessori curriculum, to each of his students, what they're ready for and what they need. And of course, instead of classes being in block time, we use these uninterrupted work cycles as an opportunity for students to really be able to deeply engage in things and not have their concentration interrupted because a bell rings and it's artificially time to move on to something else, but to really go in depth. Brad might postpone a lesson he had planned so as not to interrupt a student who's truly engaged in something meaningful. You saw the choice and the freedom of movement that gave that elementary classroom its lively, productive hum. And, you know, the student that we just described, you know, sort of the profile of a Montessori graduate is so rich because the focus from the very beginning has been on the development of the whole child, not just their academic progress, but their social, emotional, whole being as they're building who they are in the world. Oh, this is that picture I was talking about. These are your ghosts from the past.
Yep,
Who were some of these famous people, Brad?
We've got Raja Cholin, Great King Cholin. We've got Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. We've got, oh, come on. I know this one. It's 99%, or it's 10% inspiration, 99% perspiration. It's Thomas Edison. There we go.
Yes, yes.
Then we have Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Harvey Milk.
Oh, I love this picture.
And me.
And you facilitating. Well, this, you know, you may have questions over the course of the next weeks and months. And please feel free to reach out to either Brad directly or to me directly to ask more specifics about the upper elementary program. We are here for you and love talking about Montessori. Could talk about it for hours and hours. But we'll end here with just, I love this picture, the student sort of inviting you to enjoy his work. And we thank you so much for your time and joining us to learn more about upper elementary at Green Spring Montessori.